So now that we're armed, we're united, and we understand that we are all still learning, let's start dealing with external threats by looking at the stratagem of the enemy. We have already seen how effective the divide and conquer strategy is, so we need to know how to guard against it. This means we need to anticipate future attacks and have a plan to defend and counterattack. An integral part of this is to know your own mind, both your strengths and your weaknesses. Human beings are mostly the same. Some are smarter than others, some have more knowledge in certain areas, but the inner workings are pretty standardized. So external attacks are generally similar to internal attacks. So if you wanted to cause division, how would you do it? And what would be an effective method of guarding against that? Next, we need to prove our armor in battle. Psalm 144 says God is the one who trains our hands to war and our fingers to fight. And Psalm 18 says that he makes us so strong that we can bend a bow of bronze with our hands. Now, this is not referring to a physical bow. This bow is the primary weapon of our enemy, and it represents deception, as I show in Revelation 6. So the first deception that we are to overcome is self-deception. And it is in this battle that we learn the skills necessary to fight against external enemies. One of the easiest ways to know that self-deception is in progress is God is being slandered or lied on in the process. Think about every time you did something you know you weren't supposed to do. How did you convince yourself to do it? Was it that God is merciful and knows your heart? Or he wants you to be happy? What lie or half truth about God surfaced beforehand to help rationalize your sin? Another major contributor to self-deception is the rejection of truth. And that rejection usually comes when you don't like the truth and a better option comes posing as truth. Or you don't want to admit that you are wrong about something. Maybe your pride is hurt. Or maybe you have been believing falsehood your whole life and you can't believe that you and everybody around you are wrong, especially when some of those people appear to be walking with God. But when truth comes, it illuminates just like a light bulb because it just makes sense. And usually it brings understanding through answered questions. So if you are intentionally warping your own mind into believing lies by doing things like dismissing parts of the front of the Bible that you don't like or understand and taking other parts out of context to reconcile them with the parts that you do like, it's like turning off that light and blocking the entrance to where you are so no one can get to you. You are ensuring that you remain in darkness. And it would be different if somebody else deceived you, because then you could search out what they are saying and see that it is wrong. But who can reach someone that is actively convincing themselves to believe lies? The word of God through all the prophets, and even Yeshua failed at this with those of Israel who did not want to hear what God was saying and amend their ways. And even now, Yeshua is not as popular as one would think, which brings me to external deception. One of the most profound examples of this is the story of the man of God in 1 Kings 13. This story comes right after Israel and Judah split, and Jeroboam, king of Israel, set up a golden calf in Dan and another in Bethel. He then sanctifies his own feast day and places non-Levite priests to preside over his idolatry, leading Israel into sin. So God sends a prophet from Judah to Jeroboam in Bethel to prophesy against him. And he tells this prophet not to eat bread or drink water there, and not to return the way he came. So the man of God goes and prophesies as he was sent to. And first Jeroboam tries to seize him, but after that backfires, he invites him to his house to refresh himself, which obviously the prophet declines. Now there was another old prophet whose son saw the whole thing go down, and they went home and told their father everything that happened. And this old prophet hunts the man of God down with the sole purpose of getting him to come back and eat with him. Now at first, the man of God declines, but then the old prophet lies to him and says, I'm a prophet just like you, and God sent an angel to me to tell you to come back with me. And the man of God listens to him and goes back and eats and drinks with him. Now after they finish, God speaks to the old prophet and has him tell the man that because he disobeyed his mouth, he would not be buried with his fathers. And after the man left, a lion came out and slew him. So word gets back to the old prophet that the man had died, and he goes and gets his carcass and mourns him and buries him in his own sepulcher and tells his sons to bury him beside him. This is one of the most impactful and eye-opening passages in the scriptures for me on so many levels. The first reason is look how swiftly the prophet from Judah was judged for his disobedience, while the old prophet seems to get off scot-free. This speaks to the level of closeness they each had to God and the confidence that God had in each of them. Why would God send a prophet from Judah to Bethel if he had one he could use in Bethel? Surely if this old prophet was trustworthy, God would have used him for this mission. But as we see, he wasn't trustworthy. And let's take a look at the strategy this old prophet uses to persuade the man. First, he uses information obtained through others that heard the prophet's restriction to break down the wall of defense that God had built. A lot of times, an effective strategy to disarm you can be made through information that you yourself have given out thoughtlessly or to people you trust. And a lot of the time, it's those same people who actually tempt you to err. It was Eve who led Adam to eat the fruit, thinking it would make them wise. And it was Peter who tempted Yeshua to do the same because he didn't want him to die. They weren't trying to hurt them. They were both trying to help. And this is why it's good to keep your mouth shut about certain things, especially if it's something you are already struggling with. Not because some invisible entities are carrying messages and trying to influence you, but because humans do it. Next, he tells him that he is a prophet also. Me and you, we both work for God. We brothers. You love God, I love God. We the same. So he represents himself as being on equal footing with the prophet to gain his trust. Then he undermines what God has spoken by telling him God sent an angel with a different message than what God had already told him. So an angel came to me with a contradictory message to what God gave you, but God forgot to tell you that he changed the plan in the process. Now the man had the whole trip to the old prophet's house to consider what was happening. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say he probably went over every detail of what the old man said during that point and came to the conclusion that God did not tell this old man that, because he knew God and he heard from God too well. So why not just turn around? Could it be that he didn't want to hurt the old man's feelings? Perhaps the old man would be offended if he told him he didn't believe him halfway into the trip. How many times do we disobey God to spare someone else's feelings? Now, let me point out that the restrictions God gave are mostly surrounding food. And this is a central theme throughout the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. The first sin is linked to food. The error of Balaam is linked to food. Idolatry is linked to food. Why do you think Daniel didn't eat the king's meat or drink his wine? God cares about what we eat, because even eternal life is linked to food. In the end, since the man obeyed the mouth of the old prophet rather than God's mouth, God pronounces his judgment by the mouth of the old prophet. The sad part about this story is the old prophet may not have intended to get the man killed. I think he did based on his response to the man's death and who plays this role in the New Testament. But it's also possible he just assumed that God would deal with his true prophet the way he dealt with him. But that's not how God works. This old prophet didn't just get the man killed, he also got him disgraced. Not only was he not given the honor of being buried with his fathers, he was buried in the capital city of idolatry by and with the lying prophet whose false revelation cost him his life. So this story should serve as a huge warning against believing the words of people who are telling you that it is now okay to do something that God previously forbade. It doesn't matter that they're doing it without consequence. It doesn't matter if you have seen God speak or work through them in the past. It doesn't matter if millions of others are getting away with it. The only thing this tells you is that these people are not as close to God as they claim to be. Because if they were, he would have already corrected them. The closer you are to God, the less lenient he is with you, because you should know better. So you need to think twice about following others. The word of God is truth and stands firm forever. So if you have to try to reconcile two opposing versions of God or his word in your mind, one of them is false. Now notice that this bowl we are to break is bronze, which is Nakusha. And this is very similar to the word Nakash that we saw for bronze, divination, and serpent before. So what was it that the serpent offered Eve? He offered her knowledge, which she mistook for wisdom. In Nebuchadnezzar's image, the bronze represents Greece. And even now, Greece is the face of the knowledge we obtain through the education system, from medicine to law to science and mathematics, which is why sororities and fraternities are Greek letters and the members pledge allegiance to Greek, Roman, and Egyptian gods. So this bowl of bronze is the deception of knowledge that is obtained apart from God. And there are several methods used to obtain this knowledge that are identified in the Bible. One method is awning, which means to practice soothsaying. And this word awning also means cloud. So this seems to be a method of looking into the sky, perhaps at the arrangement of the clouds to determine the future, even though this is different than the meaning that is given here. There is also the word ob, which means bottle or wineskin, but this word is commonly translated familiar spirits. And the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance says that this is from the same as Ab, which means father. So this appears to be a means of trying to contact the ancestors for knowledge. Similarly, we have Yedioni, which comes from Yada, meaning to know. And this usually occurs along with Ab, and they both pertain to the earth as they are methods of trying to contact the dead. We also have Ashaf, which says conjurer or necromancer. I'm not really sure what these actually mean, as we are not given enough context to make a determination. But the definition says astrologer. There is also Kartumim, which is translated as magician and means an engraver or writer. So these seem to be people who have hidden writings or books. Next, we have Kasim, which is defined as divination. And from what I can tell, this seems to be divination through seeing. So a person who claims to have visions or dreams. And a lot of the times, this is linked to telling lies in Yahuwah's name. We also have the verb nakash, which means to practice divination or observe signs. And the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance says to use enchantment or to learn by experience. It also says properly to hiss or whisper a magic spell. And in the noun form, we see Balaam saying there is no divination against Jacob. Ironically, this is the method he uses as it relates to paying careful attention to what someone says to use it to your advantage. And this is what Balaam does in order to get Israel to sin. He pays attention to why Yahuwah would not allow him to curse them and uses that against Israel. And we see this same method employed by the servants of Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, towards Ahab. Verse 33 says, now the men did diligently observe whether anything would come from him and did hastily catch it. So this is how they got Ahab to spare Ben-Hadad, even though Ben-Hadad was the one who began the war with Israel. Finally, we have Kashef, which is sorcery. And this is what Jezebel was accused of. So what I get from this is that sorcery is joining yourself to somebody else in order to lead them astray, which is also a form of fornication. And this is akin to the method we saw with the old prophet. So all of these methods are shot from the bow of deception. Now, since bows shoot arrows, the enemy can attack us from a distance. Thus, our first line of defense is our shield. It is through our true knowledge of God, gained by meditating on His word, and our personal experiences with Him, that we are able to stop these arrows as not to be dismantled by lies and false knowledge presented as wisdom. And once the enemy approaches, we are to cut him down with our sword by speaking the same truth that allowed us to stop the arrow in the first place. Now, sometimes we are unaware that we are being targeted, like in the case of Balak trying to curse Israel. But this is where our breastplate comes into play. Balaam couldn't curse Israel because God found no iniquity in them, which means they were covered under the protection of Psalm 91, since the curse causeless cannot come. So our breastplate defends us when we are caught off guard. It also defends us when falsehoods get through, which will inevitably happen as we are being perfected. But because we are children of God, walking in his will and his righteousness, we can expect that wonderful rod of his correction to let us know when we are out of line and to check us when we get it wrong. It also works in our favor that God, who is the source of true knowledge, pretty much conceals himself from those who are not seeking him. So because we know him, we have the upper hand in the battle, since it is easier to detect when somebody is lying on someone else whose character you actually know. Now, it is important to note that all the opposition you face will not be from deceivers. Some of it may come from people who are deceived. And this can be worse, because while the deceiver knows that he is lying, the deceived are convinced that they have the truth. In this case, you want to be tactful with your sword and use it to try to cut their chains, not them. You may not always be able to break them off completely, but you do what you can while inflicting the least amount of pain possible. The last thing we want to do is intentionally turn people away from God. We are to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Finally, you need to know that you are not going to win every battle. Sometimes you have to retreat and run back to the place of refuge. And when this happens, you may feel defeated and disappointed, but that's okay. Just remember that a lost battle is not a lost war. And let those feelings motivate you to do better in the next fight. So on that note, we need to know when to retreat. First is when you don't know something. Just admit that you don't know. And if you have an opinion, give your opinion as just that, an opinion. Next would be if you are fighting for your own glory. So say, for instance, if you are trying to vindicate yourself against an accusation when God has not instructed you to do so. The truth tends to speak for itself, so it needs no defense. Another example is you are not fighting battles with the intent to bring people to Yah. You are doing it out of pride because you just want people to see you as smarter than everybody else. Another reason is that you are fighting or would be fighting a losing battle. Proverbs 9 tells us not to reprove scorners. Likewise, in Matthew 7, Yeshua tells us not to cast our pearls before swine. So how do you tell the swine from the lost sheep? What do they do with the truth that you know got through to them? Do they hate you for it, or do they put it into practice in their life? Do they accept it, or do they look for ways to negate it? I'm not talking about asking sincere questions. I'm talking about self-deception. An example, say for instance, the government mandates that everybody take a special immune-boosting pill every week to protect against communicable diseases. They send these pills out, and you notice that one of the ingredients is gelatin, which usually comes from the pig. And on top of that, the name of this pill is Asclepion, after the Greek god of medicine and healing, and the temple which this was supposedly done in, and the packaging is complete with his image, his rod, his snake, and his temple. So you are in a casual conversation with somebody, and they ask you if you got yours, and you say you're not taking them. They ask why, and you tell them pork is forbidden. And these pills are clearly related to idolatry. They tell you that all things are pure, and all that's under the Old Testament for the Jews. You show them from the scriptures that this is false, and pork and idolatry are still forbidden, and they tell you that God said to abide by the laws of the land. You point out that this is also false and take them to Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They say, well, you do what you want to do. If they gonna keep me from getting sick, I'm taking mine. God don't want us to be out here sick and getting other people sick. We need to use wisdom. Now, you could show them what true wisdom is by taking them to Ahaziah's way of dealing with sickness. and then follow up with Hezekiah's. But what would be the point? This person doesn't care what the scriptures say. They are resolved to do what they want already. So no point in continuing to argue with them about this or anything else in the scriptures going forward, although this is easier said than done, especially with loved ones. Now, suppose the same conversation takes place with another person and they say, well, I don't know, I need to pray about it because a lot of what you said makes sense. I'm just concerned about catching something and getting my family sick. This is the type of person you want to encourage and strengthen in truth because they are at least open to hearing it. And they might not get on board immediately or at all, but at least they will listen. So you can plant seeds of truth. Who knows what God will cause to grow from those seeds? The last reason is that you are called out for error. This will probably hurt your ego, and you might instinctively feel the urge to protect it. But do not reject truth to defend error. Learn from your mistakes, let the truth take root, water it, and let it grow.